By asking you a question. Who likes division? I'm not talking about math class, long division. I'm talking about the division we see when we look at the world around us. So show of hands, who likes division? We have one. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. A lot of us don't like division, as we can tell by the number of hands raised in the room. But the question is, why do we do it to ourselves? If we don't like division, if we don't like to look at the political divides in our country and around the world, and the wars and the ethnic and racial divides, and even within our families, we experience divisions. If we don't like it, why do we do it to ourselves? And I think there's a really simple antidote to division if we don't like it, but we avoid it anyway. So it just makes me ask the question, why do we do this to ourselves? And here's the antidote. This is what we're going to talk about today. What is the antidote to division? And it's one of our resolutions. Remember, we're talking about resolutions in this series, not New Year's resolutions, because it's January 22nd and we've already left those 2 weeks behind. So we're talking about resolutions as a new church. Who is God leading us to be? Who is he equipping us and calling us to be and reach? Where is he leading us in our community? So here is the antidote to division. We love our neighbors. It's that simple, and it's that messy and complicated sometimes, but that's the antidote. We love our neighbors. And so we're going to be in John 4 again, as we will throughout this series, looking at different parts of one of my favorite Jesus encounters in all of the Bible. And we're going to be in John 4 this morning, seeing how Jesus did this and talk about why we don't do it, and then how we can do it in spite of ourselves and actually follow Jesus in loving our neighbors the way that he does, the way that he loves us. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about how we as Neighborhood Church collectively together are being led, how God is leading us, and how we're resolved to love our neighbors together. So I'm going to start by reading from John chapter 4, verses 3 to 9. And you can just listen. I like to read it first so we can listen and kind of figure out where we are in the story and what's going on. And so this is John writing, one of Jesus's closest 3 disciples, an eyewitness to what's going on here. And this is what he says. And this, again, was important enough to John that he included it when he was writing about Jesus' life. So starting in John 4, verse 3. So he, Jesus, left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. So there it is, one of my favorite Jesus encounters. And this woman is just putting up the wall between her and Jesus. She's not really interested. So let's take this passage in a couple of pieces now, and we'll kind of explore a couple of areas. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. But no, he didn't. Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria. In fact, a lot of devout Jews and Jewish people who lived in Judea would not go through Samaria. Geographically, on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, from the south there's Judea, and then there's Samaria, and then there's Galilee. So if he wanted the shortest route, maybe Jesus had to go through Samaria. But most Jews wouldn't, because they did not get along with Samaritans. So what they would do is they would actually cut east across Judea and cross the Jordan River, which was the boundary on the east side. And then they would cut north, and then they would cut back west across the Jordan River to go into Galilee. They wouldn't set foot in Samaria because they didn't like each other. The Jews looked at the Samaritans sort of as apostates. And they said, we're not going to associate with you because you have broken the law. You've broken the covenant with God. What happened was, before all of Israel fell, the northern kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrians. And the Assyrians conquered it, and then they exiled many of the Jews the Israelites who were living there. and then brought in other peoples from all over Mesopotamia. And this is what they would do just to kind of mix people together. But in the law of Moses at this time, it had said not to marry foreigners, not to marry someone outside of Israel, God's chosen people. But the Samaritans ended up doing that. So they married people who were not Israelites. And so it became the group of people became called the Samaritans. And they were looked down on by the Jews because they had kind of become apostate, broken the law. They were also looked down on by everybody else because they were still half Israelite. So nobody liked them. They were outcast. Everybody looked down on them. So Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria except for one reason. When John uses the word, what's translated here as had to, it's the Greek word dei, D-E-I, dei. And it just means something is necessary. When John uses this in his writing, so the Gospel of John, where we are here, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and he probably wrote Revelation as well. When he uses this specific Greek word, he's not talking about, I had to do something, it was convenient, or I just decided that I wanted it. What he's talking about is necessity, but it's divine necessity. It's according to God's will. It's what God wants. And so God had a purpose for Jesus to go to Samaria. And because Jesus is God the Son, he's perfectly in tune with God the Father. And so he's in tune with this purpose. And so Jesus had to, because it was his Father's will, he had to go through Samaria to be obedient. And so in verses 5 to 9, we sort of learn what God's purpose is for sending Jesus through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." John is giving some explanation in parentheses because his audience was not from this area. They were from relatively far away, kind of on the north central part of the Mediterranean Sea, and this is all kind of on the eastern shores. So they're kind of far away. He's explaining why, what's going on here because they might not have necessarily known that Jews and Samaritans didn't get along, but he's telling them. But this is God's purpose. It's kind of interesting. God's purpose for sending Jesus through Samaria, the reason Jesus had to go was simply to go to this town, to go to this well, and start a conversation with this woman. It was that simple. That was the purpose. And this was a pretty scandalous purpose. There are a couple of reasons. The first is that, again, Jews and Samaritans didn't get along. Jews referred to the Samaritans as half-breeds. And I don't know about you, but if someone referred to me as a half-breed, I probably wouldn't really want to be friendly with them. There probably wouldn't be much love lost there. So they don't get along. They don't like each other. And then the woman said, or John's explanation, is Jews don't associate with Samaritans. And so the woman is putting up this wall saying, thanks, but no thanks. They don't associate. And this actually, what John could be referring to, a way to translate this in the culture at the time, association would have to do with religious rituals and festivals and how they would worship. So this could actually have to do with things like cups and plates. We don't share those things between Jews and Samaritans. And here Jesus is literally asking her for a drink of water out of her cup. So this is scandalous stuff going on right here. And so the woman says, how can you ask me this? It's not just because she's a Samaritan, right? What does she say? You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. There's the ethnic divide, but there's also this kind of cultural stigma that men did not talk to women who they didn't know, especially outside of, a kind of closed environment where it was all invited guests. They wouldn't talk to strangers of the opposite sex. They just wouldn't. So there is a lot going on here, and the woman just says, why are you asking me? She's putting the wall up. But what she doesn't recognize is Jesus came down to break down those barriers. Jesus came to break down any wall that we could put up. She's still starting to resist. There's another odd detail in this story. Does anyone remember what time it was?
Noon.
It was noon. Why would you walk? So the well The archaeological evidence shows this well is about 3/4 of a mile outside the town. Why would you walk through the desert 3/4 of a mile by yourself at the hottest part of the day with the most intense sun? This woman was an outcast from her people, from the very community where she lived. She was more willing to be alone in the heat of the day and suffer than to be seen and known by the people in her community. Because there was something that they saw in her that she didn't want to look in the mirror and confront herself. And we're about to find out what that is. A few verses later, as this conversation continues, Jesus says to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." And this is how I picture this. I was hoping there might be one empty chair in the front row, but don't worry about it. I picture her sitting at the well looking at Jesus. He says, "Go, call your husband and come back." And she says, "Oh, I have no husband." Conversation's over. I don't have a husband. Don't talk to me. That's how I picture this. And Jesus said to her, she gets more than she bargained for. "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." So here she is trying to put up the wall. She's resisting Jesus. She's hiding something because she is ashamed. So she doesn't want to tell Jesus her marital history, her marital status. The people in her community have probably heaped the shame on her too. That's why she's going at noon. To avoid all of that, to avoid the shame and the condemnation that they're heaping on her. And unfortunately, we are still heaping a lot of condemnation and shame on this woman today. If anyone wants to jump in, great. If not, then I'll just answer the question. What's the most frequent assumption you've heard about this woman? In church circles, in preaching, anything like that. What assumptions have you heard? Prostitute, right? So she's maritally unfaithful, so the men leave her. Can I tell you something that's probably a little more likely? Probably, it could be that she was widowed several times.
Yeah.
Or it could be that she just was neglected and left behind. We often look at this time period and we think, oh man, we have so much divorce today. They didn't have that back then. Oh, they did. But here's the difference. Only the man, only the husband could initiate the divorce. So it's probably more likely that she has just been left behind and neglected and hurt too many times to trust again and marry again. And in this society, it was a very patriarchal culture. Everything was run by men. It revolved around men. She would have been poor and powerless, unable to have a job and provide for herself. So maybe the truth is that the best she could do to provide for her, to have provision and to have protection and security was to settle for a man who would care for her, but who wouldn't commit to her. So most likely she's been rejected. She's been neglected by these ex-husbands and the very community where she lives. But also, the last line that Jesus says is important. Or not quite the last line, but he says, "And the man you have now is not your husband." What he's saying with the man that you are living with is not your husband. How many church people today will avoid at all costs a couple that they find out is cohabiting? Or how many of us, when there is sexual sin in someone's history or even in their present, will hold that person at arm's length and say, no, you're not welcome here. Jesus had to go through Samaria. And she was the reason. The thing is, I think John is being a little bit intentionally vague here. Was she outcast because she's a sinner? Or is she a sinner because she's an outcast? What came first? What is going on here? I think the answer is it doesn't really matter. She is exactly the person that Jesus came to meet so that she could have an encounter with God. Outcast, neglected, sinner, whatever the history. Whatever the present reality. Jesus cared enough and was committed enough to her to go and meet her so that she could meet God. He crossed borders and he crossed customs and he threw off stigmas and he crossed prejudices and biases and hate so that she could meet God. Any barrier that humans create, anyone that you can think of based on race, ethnicity, economic class, how we talk, how we think, how we look, where we live, what we eat, anything that we could think of, a barrier that we could put up, Jesus came to tear it down. And there was a stigma just for Jesus to sit at that well and talk to that woman. Remember, men didn't talk to women they didn't know. Men certainly didn't talk to outcast women who were maybe looked at as being immoral or whatever. But Jesus is willing to be looked at in that way so that he can go and talk to her and offer her what she truly needs. We talked about kind of what's going on in this conversation a couple of weeks ago. They're sitting at a well, of course, so Jesus asks for a drink of water. And the conversation very quickly progresses to living water, just spiritual living water. And so Jesus is there to offer her exactly what she needs, which is life. And how did he do it? He made her his neighbor. He sat at the well next to her. And he just asked her one simple question. Maybe we could say in today's society, many people would say, oh, he got into her business a little bit. That's an inappropriate question to ask. You know what? He was okay with that because he wanted her to be in community and he wanted her to have life. And we're just like that woman because we resist love and we resist loving people. We resist opening ourselves up to people. We'd rather be alone and isolated and in the heat of the day, in the intense sun, and to be seen and known. Because if we're honest with ourselves, we've all done some stuff. And we've all seen some stuff. We've been through some stuff. And everybody else out there around us that we see in our world, they've all done some stuff too. And we think, well, if I've done some stuff and they've done some stuff, then what do I have to offer in this situation? What do I have to say that they haven't heard or haven't seen or don't know? But the thing is, we are also like that woman in that Jesus came to meet us and to give us life. And the life that he has placed inside of us. John would write a little bit later in the Gospel of John that the one who believes will have rivers of living water flow from within them. The purpose of that is that as Jesus puts his living water within us, we would then go and bring it to other people. And show them that same life. Give them a drink of that same living water. And how do we do it? Well, just like Jesus did, we make them our neighbor. We love our neighbors. We love them as Christ loved us. And I want to talk about, there are many ways to do this, but I want to talk about two categories of ways to do this morning. And they come from Jeremiah chapter 29. And Jeremiah spoke to the Israelites after both kingdoms had fallen. Remember, the Jews and the Israelites and Samaritans didn't like each other. The Samaritan area fell first. Well, now both have fallen at the time that Jeremiah is talking to them. And what's happened is the Babylonians now have come in, and all of the people with any kind of power or economic status, anything like that, have been exiled, and they're living in Babylon. And Jeremiah is talking to those people in a place that they are not happy to be. They didn't choose to be there. They didn't want to go there. This is what Jeremiah says to those people in verses 5 through 7 of Jeremiah 29. He says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. There's at least 3 generations right here. God is saying, yeah, you didn't choose to be here, but I put you here. So live faithfully here. All of this passage, these two verses, can be boiled down into the two words highlighted there: settle down. Make your home among the people. Make your living among the people. Raise your family with the people. Invite them into your life. Invite them to sit at your table. Settle down. That's the first way we make people our neighbors and we love our neighbors. Here's the second way in verse 7. Also, seek the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Make the community better. No matter what you think about the local government, no matter what you think about the political or cultural or religious influences, make the community better. Because as it prospers, you too will prosper. Find and engage ways to meet real felt needs around you. This is exactly what we wanted to do in October when we had our first Engage Day. And we went and we did the fall cleanup for 5 families who wouldn't have been able to do it themselves. It was a real simple, but a real felt need that we could go and meet to make the community better and help people who couldn't help themselves. That's what we did just before Christmas when we did the Engage project of collecting winter clothes and gear and other necessities for the family of refugees who's moved into our community. It means to be generous and to be and to serve where you've been sent. Not to long for the next place that you'll get to go. A lot of Salt Lake City kind of has this stigma of being the stepping stone in people's careers. They'll come from a smaller market and they'll spend 3-4 years in Salt Lake City and they'll go to the next place. And most people for those 3 to 4 years just long for the next spot. This is settle down. Seek the prosperity of where you're at and serve and invest and build relationships there. Serve where you've been sent. You might not have chosen Utah, maybe you did. But if you're here, I believe it's because you have been sent here by God. God has a purpose for you and a place for you here. And so I want to put this up on the screen, and this is called a vision frame. And this is essentially Neighborhood Church on one page. You can see our mission on the right side, to lead our neighbors to life-changing relationships with Jesus. And what we've been talking about this morning is really right here. And I'll talk about each one of these, but right here, this top line here, and this top line here. So our mission is what we want to do. We want to lead our neighbors to life-changing relationships with Jesus because we believe it's that important that when you meet Jesus, everything about you will change. You'll be transformed from the inside out, and in that way, your life will change. And our values are sort of our why. Why do we care about doing that? What's our motivation? And it's because of our neighbors. And this is worded here. We love the people around us, but we love our neighbors. It's what it's about. And our neighbors are whoever comes, whoever shows up, whoever knocks at the door, whoever we are rubbing shoulders with at work, whoever is in need that we see, whoever we run into at the grocery store, the ones that are forgotten and left out, the classmates that we sit next to in school. That's who our neighbors are. And then we want to engage. So on the bottom is sort of our strategy. So if we have what we want to do, why it's important to us, this is kind of the how. How are we going to lead people toward Jesus? And the first one, and this is what we're talking about today when we talk about loving neighbors, is engaging our community. Again, real felt needs. What do we see out there? How can we engage and make this a better community for everybody? Not just Neighborhood Church, but when I say the community, I mean all of this that's around us. This is why as we are exploring where's the next place that we're going to meet after the living room, one of the criteria, I mean, there are some other important considerations like how much rent can we afford, but one of the important criteria is who can we partner with? How can we help? If we're in a school, how can we serve them and not just use their stuff on Sunday? And that's one of the reasons that we're prioritizing schools as places to look, is because we want our rent to go back toward the community, not just into a business's pocket. So that's one of our criteria. How can we help? And then at the top, it says marks, and this is short for marks of a disciple. What this means is if we are committed to leading our neighbors to life-changing relationships with Jesus, and we want people to become followers of Jesus, if we're being faithful to the way that God has wired us, faithful to what he's called us to do, then what will the disciples we're making look like? What does it look like to follow Jesus together here at Neighborhood Church? That's what the marks of a disciple is. And the one we're talking about is on the top of the screen. I know it's a bit small, but it says, am I serving and blessing others? So we all have to ask ourselves this question. Am I serving and am I blessing the people around us? Am I asking the person at the cafe I go to every Thursday morning how I can pray for them when I run into them? Am I sharing with them about, hey, there's this church that's starting up, Neighborhood Church, we'd love to have you, and we would love to just help you on your spiritual journey? Are we serving others? Are we helping people with projects around their house? Are we, whatever it is, are we going to make donations to the clothes closet or the food pantry locally? Are we just helping our neighbors mow their lawn once in a while? Or snow blowing the sidewalks? Are we serving and are we intentionally blessing others? When you bless somebody in our divided world, it is surprising. It says something. And a lot of people ask, why are you doing this? Kind of like that woman, why are you talking to me? And then we get to share why. So those are the what, the why, the how, and what we're after. Marks of a disciple. And the thing is, we all have a well. Jesus had to go through Samaria. We all have someone or somewhere that we have to go because Jesus has sent us there. We just have to. Many of us in this room probably right now, like our heart is probably beating a little bit faster because we're thinking, yeah, you're right. There is a place that God is sending me to go. And maybe we've resisted it. Maybe we just have a little bit of fear well up when we think about it. That's probably a good sign, by the way. We all have a well that God is sending us to, a place that we have to go. And no matter who is there, no matter how different they are, no matter how different they look or think, those are our neighbors. And our resolution, what we are committed to do, is to love our neighbors. And the thing is, if we look at this whole thing, all of this is important. It's who we want to be. It's who we believe Jesus is calling us to be in the community. But the thing is, if we don't do this one well, if we don't love our neighbors well, if we don't engage in real needs and serve and bless other people, none of the other stuff happens. We're stuck at square one. None of it happens unless we do this key foundational piece. It's really just as simple as loving people and making them our neighbors. So I want to leave you with this question as we begin to think about this a bit for a few minutes and reflect. Where is your well? Where is the place that you have to go because God is sending you? And I want to put these questions just to guide us in our time of thinking and praying and reflecting, just so that we can be intentional in these next few minutes. Intentional about pressing into God's presence and what He has for us. So I want to encourage you to just go before God and say, God, where is my well? God, where are you sending me? Where do I have to go to love the people there? And maybe this one resonates more this morning. Maybe this is where you want to spend your next few minutes. God, where have I held back from loving the people around me? Where have I held back from loving my neighbors?